Boy, oh boy, have we seen some interesting stories come out of the NHL. We have some great stories to talk about, as well as I'm going to give my overall season outlook on the NHL. It is currently Wednesday, February 15th, and I have the time to talk about the NHL, so we are going to do it. But before we get into any of the current stories for the NHL, we are going to talk about the teams that are currently on bye week, and then we'll talk about the upcoming bye weeks. So, first of all, keep in mind this is for any of you listening who have a team that you currently follow in this list. So, keep this in mind when you're watching NHL scores and stats. Um, so, the current teams on bye week are the Carolina Hurricanes, February 12th through the 16th. So you're about to end here soon. The Chicago Blackhawks are going to end on the 17th. The Boston Bruins are through the 17th. Montreal Canadiens also on the 17th is when they end. Nashville Predators also end on the 17th. The Tampa Bay Lightning will end on the 16th. And the Washington Capitals also end on the 16th. There's a lot of teams, but that is the current list of teams on bye week that are really close to ending here soon. Alright, so the upcoming bye weeks, alright? So we have the Buffalo Sabres, which will be the 20th through the 24th. We have the Columbus Blue Jackets, which will be February 20th through the 24th. We have the Dallas Stars, which will be the 19th through the 23rd. We have the Detroit Red Wings, the 22nd through the 26th. Minnesota, the 22nd through the 26th. San Jose Sharks, the 20th through the 24th. We have the St. Louis Blues, the 21st through the 25th. The Vancouver Canucks, the 20th through the 24th. And finally, the Winnipeg Jets, the 22nd through the 26th. So, that's a long list. I believe that is all the bye weeks. So, the last team on bye week will be Detroit and Winnipeg. I think those will be the last teams on bye week throughout the entire season. So, interesting list. So, keep that in mind when paying attention to scores and stats. Now, let's talk about current overall stories. We're gonna talk about some interesting things that have happened in the league, and then we'll give a quick overall season outlook. I will be a little bit briefer with the overall season outlook, or try to be at least. And we will we'll put more emphasis on the current stories that are coming out of the NHL right now. Normally, I don't talk about stories that I think are interesting because, well, the majority of them I don't think really are important to talk about because you can hear them from a lot of different places. But these, I think, are big enough to talk about right now. So, first things first, let's talk about the St. Louis Blues. The St. Louis Blues fired Ken Hitchcock recently. And by recently, it was last week. But they fired him nonetheless and put Mike Yeo under as head coach because he was the assistant coach to the St. Louis Blues. If you don't know, Mike Yeo used to be the Minnesota Wild head coach last season, and became an assistant coach with the St. Louis Blues. And guess what? Now the Blues are doing phenomenal. Currently, up until this point, they are 5-1-0. Now, granted, they play a game tonight against the Detroit Red Wings. We'll see how they do. I believe that the Blues should win that game. But now the Blues are doing outstanding. Why? Because Mike Yeo plays a very simple hockey game. He simplifies the game really, really well, and he makes the players play an easier hockey game than some of the other coaches. And because of this, Mike Yeo is doing extremely well. Now, we'll see how how the St. Louis Blues play in the playoffs, but I think this is going to benefit them in the long run. And I think the Blues can continue their streak and do really, really, really well up until the playoffs. In fact, I think because of this, I think that the St. Louis Blues will no longer be in that wild card spot in the final playoff spot. I think they'll be in the third playoff spot or second playoff spot going into the final or going into the playoffs. So the Blues are an outstanding story right now. The Blues are doing extremely well, and I think that because of this, the Blues are going to do well under Mike Yeo. Now let's move on where we're going to go back east where some extremely big stories have happened. We're going to let's talk about the big one out of the east, the coaching change in Montreal. So, Boston fired Claude Julien recently, and Montreal decided we're going to fire our head coach as well. So, what happened is the Montreal Canadiens decided to pick up Claude Julien. And they fired Michael Therrien, sorry. And while this is an interesting move, I'm quite baffled by it and curious as to why Montreal did it. Therrien has done very well in just overall with the Montreal Canadiens. He's done extremely well. I mean, he's first in the Atlantic Division right now. And he has Carey Price and he has Shea Weber on his team, granted. But they have done wonders for him, as well as his coaching has clearly done something for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, here's the issue. I think Therrien is more of an offensive coach, at least more than Claude Julien. That is how I've always viewed Therrien as a head coach. His style is more offensive than some of the coaches in the league. And while that can be a good thing and a bad thing, I think in this situation it'll be interesting to see if Claude Julien actually hurts the Montreal Canadiens, because Claude Julien might tell them to sit back and play extremely well defensively. Now, granted, that might help them really well in the playoffs, because in the playoffs, it's one and 2 goal games. Teams are not gonna go full out risky plays, and they're gonna play extremely well. Defensively, those are the teams that are gonna do well. Now, we'll see how this ends up helping or hurting Montreal, but I'm unsure of this move. I think Claude Julien clearly has some good experience. I mean, he's won a Stanley Cup with the Boston Bruins. He has 538 wins in 14 seasons. Not only with he's previously coached the Canadiens, the New Jersey Devils, and now previously the Boston Bruins. So, granted, he did start out in Montreal, and so I can understand that he knows their system probably. But I'm kind of curious as to why right now that Montreal is like, we're going to get rid of our head coach. So, granted, they have not done very well in the playoffs in past seasons. But I don't blame that on the coach. I think that was all on the players. Players like PK Subban, Carey Price, etc., etc. I think that was all on them. I think that was a player thing, not a coach thing. And so I'm kind of curious to see how this turns out. His third game overall with Montreal will be his 1,000th as a head coach. So 3 games in, he'll have 1,000 games as an NHL head coach. So he has some experience, and he's won some games, and he's won a Stanley Cup with the Boston Bruins. Now, granted, that Boston Bruins team was stacked, but this is an interesting move out of the East. The other thing is, I'm kind of curious as to why Boston decided to fire Claude Julien right now. I don't know if they're trying to pick up somebody like Ken Hitchcock. I'm not quite sure. But currently, Boston's in the third playoff spot, and they're sitting decently. And so I'm quite curious to see what they're trying to do in Boston. So, granted, I think they could be playing better, but I think part of that's on Tuukka Rask. I think part of that is on the defensive core, and overall, I think Boston's just. I think there's a player issue as well as a coaching issue in Boston. So, interesting move out of the East. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting move out of the East. Now we have an interesting story that I am excited to talk about. We're gonna move up. We're gonna move from the Atlantic Division to the Metropolitan Division. So, the New York Rangers and the Columbus Blue Jackets played on Monday. Now, granted, I am a New York Rangers fan, so I am a little biased on this, but I think that this is the pushback that the Rangers have been waiting for. I think the Rangers are pushing back in the Metropolitan Division. Lately, they've been sitting back, and it hasn't helped them, but it hasn't hurt them. But they've been playing really well recently. In fact, they have 6 wins in a row. They're on a 6-game winning streak. Goalies and defense are playing well. Lundqvist has been outstanding. They've been playing 1-goal games. They haven't been trying to get 7 goals and losing 7-6. They've been playing really well. They played against Anaheim and beat them 4-1. They beat Columbus obviously 3-2. I mean, they've been doing really, really well. I mean, they beat Nashville. Overall, just strong play out of the New York Rangers as of late. And I think part of the reason is because all their players are back and they're healthy. We have Mika Zibanejad, who is back, and he's doing decent. He needs to get back into the groove, but I think he'll get there by the time playoffs come around. We have Rick Nash, who's doing decent. Not outstanding work, but he's doing decent. We have Matt Zuccarello doing well. We have players like Ryan McDonough who are doing well. Derek Stepan's a little in the shadows right now. He's not really doing all that well, or at least scoring wise. But overall, he's still playing decently well with the New York Rangers. Michael Grabner's doing well. JT Miller, Kevin Hayes. I mean, the list goes on and on. We have a deep team here with the New York Rangers, and they're doing extremely well. They're putting points up. They're beating some strong teams, as we can see. We see them beat the Columbus Blue Jackets in a 3-2 game, and they're doing well. Dan Girardi got his goal shorthanded last on Monday, and against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and overall it was a good game. The New York Rangers, for the majority of that game, controlled it offensively. They controlled the game. They controlled the pace of the game. They had long possession times in the offensive zone. Overall, the New York Rangers they're making a pushback in the East, and they're doing a very good job of it. Right now, they're tied for third place with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think the Columbus Blue Jackets are still in that third place position, but they're tied for it. So the New York Rangers are in that wild card spot. But as we can see, I mean, we have Columbus is going into a bye week coming up, and we also have the Washington Capitals currently on bye week, which will end soon. But the Columbus Blue Jackets, I think once the Columbus Blue Jackets go into bye week, the New York Rangers secure that spot. I think they secure that third overall playoff spot in the Metropolitan Division. And I think this is going to help them in the long run, and I'm going to talk about that here in a sec. We have, again, they're starting to play the full game, and they have deadly depth. I think those are the biggest things, and their goalies and defense are playing well. And they're possessing the puck. They're possessing the puck. You possess the puck, you win games. It's very simple. They're getting pucks deep, getting pucks to the net, and they're scoring goals and winning hockey games. Simple as that. So yeah. Overall, the New York Rangers are doing very well. I think this is where they decide we're gonna secure that playoff spot in the East, in the Metropolitan Division, in the third playoff spot. If they go into the if they stay in a wild card spot, I think it might hurt them because they have to push through the Atlantic Division, and playing against the Montreal Canadiens first round, while would be an exciting game, I wouldn't, if as a New York Rangers fan, I don't want to see that happen. But I think the Montreal Canadiens are the most dangerous team to the New York Rangers. And I think New York can stay in the Eastern Conference and go all the way through and beat Montreal in the Eastern Conference Finals if that happens. So, yeah, I think this will be a very interesting playoff standings this year. Although, I guess I have to say this now, Montreal, with the new coaching change, might play a little differently, so New York might be able to beat them now. So it'll be interesting to see. But overall, good play from the New York Rangers. All right, so those are my stories I want to talk about. Let's talk about some interesting things. Let's talk about the overall season outlook, like I always want to talk about. All right, we're going to talk about the good teams, the bubble teams, and the bad teams as my current outline stands, and then we'll talk about playoff predictions. So, good teams. I'm going to be a little quicker with some of these because I've already talked about them. So, I picked the top 5 out of each conference. So, let's just jump right into it, all right? So, let's start with the East, since that's what we were talking about. We have the New York Rangers, Pittsburgh Penguins, Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Washington Capitals. All right, so the Toronto Maple Leafs, I think, are a underrated team. In fact, I think they've been doing extremely well for Toronto, or playing as a Toronto Maple Leafs team. Coach Babcock has done wonders for them. I think they're further ahead in their development than they thought they would be. I think they would not have been expecting to be in the playoffs this year, but they have been. And I think part of that is picking up Austin Matthews. It has helped them tremendously to have a first overall pick who has done wonders for their team. Not only that, but Austin Matthews is an overall player, has helped them out extremely well. Not only that, the team has been buying into Coach Babcock's system, and Babcock is an extremely outstanding coach. He's just an overall an amazing coach, and it has helped Toronto tremendously. Montreal and New York, as I said, top 5. I mean, Montreal's first in the Atlantic. New York, they're on a 6-game winning streak, and they're 4th out of the top 4 teams in the Metropolitan, but they're right there. They're pushing for that playoffs just as much as the rest of the Metropolitan Division. I mean, the Metropolitan Division is the strongest out of the conferences right now, or divisions right now. The strongest overall. We have the Pittsburgh Penguins again out of the Metropolitan Division. They're doing extremely well right now. And finally, with the Washington Capitals. Granted, they're on bye week right now, but you can't deny how strong they've been. They've been doing extremely well. We'll see how they do in the playoffs, but right now they've been doing extremely well. Now let's move on to the West. We have the St. Louis Blues, the Anaheim Ducks, San Jose Sharks, Chicago Blackhawks, and the Minnesota Wild. Unfortunately, I have not been able to really change this list. With the East keeps changing around, mostly in the Metropolitan Division. But in the West, I this list hasn't really changed a whole lot. The only team that has changed is I had Nashville on this list last time, and now I've put St. Louis back on this list. So let's just go through it. St. Louis, again, 5-1-0 under Mike Yeo, doing extremely well. Simple hockey, playing well. Back to playing strong St. Louis hockey out of the West. Strong play overall. St. Louis definitely deserves one of the top 5 out of the Western Conference. Anaheim Ducks, probably the weakest on this list. Actually, no, I'd probably say out the least amount of depth on this list is what I should say. Least amount of depth on this team. However, they definitely deserve a top 5. Throughout the season, they've been playing one goal games. Strong defensively, offensively, not as much. Head coach has done has definitely changed up their play style. Definitely a different team in the mix right now, but a lot more consistent overall for the Anaheim Ducks. Deserves a top 5 in my opinion. San Jose Sharks, first out of the Pacific Division. Granted, that's not the hardest thing to do, but San Jose, same team, strong play. Coach DeBoer has done wonders for the San Jose Sharks, still as strong as they were in the playoffs last year. Overall, definitely deserves a top 5 in my opinion. Chicago Blackhawks, not much to say. Chicago is Chicago, doing well, strong team, strong play. Deserves a top 5 in my opinion out of the West. Minnesota Wild, new coaching change has done wonders for them, but will we see them start to die off? We saw Anaheim beat them just recently in a 1-goal game, 1-0. Will they start to die off, getting it closer to playoff time? We might see that. I mean, we've seen that happen when Anaheim was being coached by the Minnesota coach. I'm blanking on his name right now. But under the Minnesota coach, we saw Anaheim fail. We've seen this happen before, and that has overall hurt them. It hurt the Anaheim Ducks, I should say. The Minnesota Wild, I think we'll see what happens. Definitely just as deep of a team as Anaheim was a couple years ago, pushing for that Stanley Cup final. So we'll see what happens with Minnesota. But definitely deserves a top 5 spot, in my opinion. All right. So let's talk about some other teams out of the West. Boudreaux, that's the name of the Minnesota Wild coach. Man, I swear, I'm just out of it right now. All right, so let's talk about the bubble teams. So 3 bubble teams currently. We have out of the East, we have the Florida Panthers, the Philadelphia Flyers, and the New York Islanders. The Florida Panthers are a team that has some depth to them, but they also have some age to them. And I think that's part of the reason why they're not doing as well as they could have. Also, they got rid of some really important players on their team, like Brandon Peary. I don't know why they got rid of Brandon Peary. I don't know if it was because of cap space or what, but they got rid of Brandon Peary, and that has tremendously hurt them. I mean, he's helping out the New York Rangers so much right now. Also, Jaromir Jagr, he's 45, and while he's a great player and he was way better in his prime, right now he is So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens with Jaromir Jagr, but and how he ends up playing for the rest of the season. But overall, Florida, I think they could be playing better. But they're definitely a bubble team, and they can make a push for that wild card spot. Philadelphia Flyers have been pushing for that last wild card spot for the entire season. And overall, I think that has helped them, but it also is kind of tiresome for them. Um, it's going to be really difficult for them. I mean, they don't really have a chance to get to push for one or two, or for either wild card spot, because the Metropolitan Division is so packed and strong right now that they really only have a chance to push for that last wild card spot. And right now, Toronto is holding that. Toronto has 63 points. Philadelphia is close behind. They got 61. But still, they're going to need to play better if they want to secure that last wild card spot. Finally, I have the New York Islanders. Finally have been playing better. The firing of their head coach seems to have done wonders for them. And guess what? Now they are 3 points behind that wild card spot. In fact, they could end up pushing for the New York Rangers, or I guess for that first wild card spot. They could push for the Metropolitan Division because they're in the Metropolitan Division. We'll see what happens. I don't think they will end up securing either wild card spot. They could end up securing that, and if so, then the Metropolitan Division has 5 teams in it, and that would be crazy to see. So yeah, overall, I think that the New York Islanders, if they keep pushing and they keep winning games, they could get into that last wild card spot. Now, granted, they have not done extremely well. I think last game they lost 4-0, but we'll see if they come back and do works or do wonders and do some work to get to that last wild card spot. I mean, you have some time. You're halfway through February, and playoffs don't start till April, so you basically have 6 weeks left to do that, and that's a lot of time going up into playoffs. All right. Moving on from the East, let's talk about the West bubble teams. All right, so we have the LA Kings, the Calgary Flames, and the Nashville Predators. I think this is pretty straightforward, but the Nashville Predators are holding that first wild card spot, and they've been pushed out of the third playoff spot in the Central Division by the St. Louis Blues. Also, Nashville's just not playing as well. LA Kings are in that second playoff spot. They finally have gotten into that playoff spot, but we'll see what ends up happening. I think with the return of Jonathan Quick, they will be more of a threat to be reckoned with. In fact, they could end up securing that third Pacific Division playoff spot. They could kick Edmonton out of there. I mean, they are only 8 points behind, and LA can do it. But I think they'll stay in that wild card spot. Realistically, I think that's where they'll be. Then we have the Calgary Flames. Calgary been playing better as of late, but they can be much better, and we've seen them be much better. The Nashville Predators, I think that's pretty straightforward, and I already talked about them. So yeah, that's all the bubble teams. Now let's move on to the bad teams. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the bad teams, so we're going to kind of breeze through these, all right? So we have, in the Eastern Conference, we have the Carolina Hurricanes, the Detroit Red Wings, and the Tampa Bay Lightning. 2 out of the 3 I thought would for sure be in the playoffs this year. Carolina, I think, was expected not to be in the playoffs. However, lately, they have not been playing very well. In fact, throughout the regular season, they've been playing relatively decently up until now. So I'm kind of surprised as to where they are. I think they could be playing better. Detroit, obviously, they're not doing very well. In fact, they're the last team in the Eastern Conference, which is surprising to say the least. I did not think they would be I thought they would be in a playoff spot, and right now they're not. But let alone, I did not even think they would be close to bottom of the league. I thought they would be probably, out of the, the list. I thought they would be at least middle of the pack, if not just below middle of the pack. And we're not seeing that right now. Same thing with Tampa Bay. I thought they would be in a playoff spot. Right now they're third to last, and that's not good for Tampa Bay. Even with Steven Stamkos out, that's not good. So overall, interesting to see where standings are, but those three teams specifically, not playing very well, and they definitely need to get their game back. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the Western Conference. The bad teams out of the Western Conference. We have the Colorado Avalanche, the Arizona Coyotes, and the Dallas Stars. All of them are holding the last three positions in the bottom three positions in the Western Conference. The Colorado Avalanche are last. The Arizona Coyotes are just above them, and the Dallas Stars are just above them. Now, for both Colorado and Arizona, I think both of them were. I expected both of them to not be doing very well this year. And I think they could be playing better, but overall, I kind of expected that out of both teams. The Dallas Stars, however, I expected to be in the playoffs, considering how well they were playing last year. And so, yeah, I'm quite baffled as to why the Dallas Stars are not doing very well this year. And I think part of it's just offensive production's not there. Last year they had offensive production. This year they didn't. Pretty simple. But I think the Dallas Stars definitely need to be doing better, because they have the team in front of them. All right, moving on. All right, so here's where we're going to talk about playoff prediction. If you don't know how I do my playoff prediction, here's how I do my playoff prediction. I look at the current status of each team, and based off of where they are now, I predict, based on what's going on right now, who has a good chance of making the playoffs and being a deep run team. Granted, these are my opinions. I don't say who will win a Stanley Cup. I say who has a good chance of being a deep run team and going all the way to the Eastern or Western Conference Final. And I go from there. All right. I will also say which teams have a chance to be argued to be deep run teams. But let's talk about this. All right. So out of the Eastern Conference, we have the New York Rangers, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and potentially the Montreal Canadiens. We'll see what happens there. I have a question mark by the Montreal Canadiens. I don't know what to say about Montreal because they can be iffy. If you want to, I think they'll be a deep run team for sure, but we'll see if the coaching change ends up hurting them at all. Pittsburgh and New York, I think they've always been argued, still deserve the best chance out of the Metropolitan in my division. I think those are in the Metropolitan division, in my opinion. I think those two teams have the best chance. Now, granted, I am a New York Rangers fan, but I think those two teams have the most experience in winning playoff games and doing well in the playoffs out of the list in the Metropolitan division. So, those are my top three teams. You could also potentially argue Washington and Columbus, in my opinion, although I don't think Washington and Columbus could replace either New York or Pittsburgh. So Washington or Columbus would have to replace Montreal, in my opinion. But these teams are deep run teams. All of them going to, I think New York or Pittsburgh will go to the Eastern Conference Final, and then Montreal will probably go to the Eastern Conference Final as well, in my current opinion. Now, granted, we could see Ottawa or Boston get there, but I think with the status of Montreal and the strength of their defense and goalie, I think that Montreal can do it. So that is my prediction. Out of the West, I think San Jose, Chicago, and St. Louis. Those are my picks out of the Western Conference. Minnesota, Anaheim, and Edmonton are all also able to be argued. Out of the Western Conference, I had to pull Anaheim out of this list. I think San Jose is just playing better hockey overall. In fact, they're also a deeper team and a stronger team. Chicago is Chicago. They're doing well in the Central Division. And St. Louis is back to themselves and playing strong again. So those three teams, I think, have a chance to make it all the way to the Western Conference Final. Minnesota also has a chance to make it there. Anaheim also has a chance to make it there. Edmonton does as well, but I think they have a lot less of one. I don't think they're quite there yet. So we'll see what happens with Edmonton, but this year I'm not quite sure they'll make it all the way to the Western Conference Final. Overall, that is my list. Those are my playoff predictions. As we get closer to playoffs, I will do a playoff podcast. And I'm thinking at the very least I will do one per round, hopefully, and talk about what's going on in each round. But yeah, so as we get closer to playoffs, we'll start talking more and more about playoffs. Also, keep in mind if you want to tune in to listen to me talk more about this, we will be talking about the NHL in a new podcast I will be joining in. I have a group of people, and my goal is to also have it to upload the podcast to this current channel, so you'll be able to hear me talk to other people. I will try to do some of more solo podcasting myself, so you get to hear more of my opinions as well. But I am part of a group of people that is going to be talking about the NHL. Currently, we have at least 3 members that will be regularly showing up, and I will be uploading those. We will be doing those on Saturdays, and I will give more info as time goes on. This Saturday will be our first podcast, and I will give more info as we get closer to that. And you may even see an upload come up this weekend. So, and I'll give a little introduction to what's going on in this podcast, kind of how the format is set up before you start listening to the podcast. If I upload that to my channel this week, so tune into that. This Saturday, I plan to upload it. So yeah, it'll probably be like Saturday night or something. But this Saturday, I plan to upload that. So yeah, hopefully you guys tune into that. I think it'll be interesting. We get to hear multiple points of view. We got fans of multiple teams coming in to talk. I am part of a New York Rangers Anaheim Ducks fan. So I got one in the East and one in the West. But I also think we have a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. We have a Chicago Blackhawks fan. A couple of Chicago Blackhawks fans potentially, and but a lot of respect around the league in the NHL. So I think it'll be a good podcast. I hope you guys tune in, and yeah, you should see an upload on that soon. Regarding this podcast, I hope you guys enjoyed. Leave a like if you want to hear more, or a favorite if you're listening to this on SoundCloud. Follow if you're on SoundCloud more podcast stuff. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, subscribe for more of these. I know I haven't uploaded a lot of these as of late. I've had a lot of projects to deal with, and unfortunately, this had to get pushed to the back burner, as well as a couple other things that I wanted to do. So, luckily, I had a free day, so that's why I'm doing this and uploading as much as I possibly can. So that's where that's why this one came into play. And so subscribe for more content. And yeah, thank you all for listening. I will talk to you guys in the next one. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.